Hey, Jar.
Hey.
Should we start going through blockers?
Yeah, we can do that. I just went through the list before this meeting myself.
Oh, okay.
But like there's really
I have something to type anyway, so I'll give you a few minutes.
Sure.
Okay, it was not a few minutes, it was a second.
Cool. So Graham just joined. Let's get started.
Hey, Graham.
Going through blockers first. I went through the full issue list just to make sure it aligns with the highlights and the things that we should be tracking. It looks good. I closed a couple issues that are no longer, actually both either closed or unlabeled issues that are no longer blockers. This list is pretty much all we have right now, which is the build logs, mapping services, proxy request buffering, which is sort of related to mapping services since we need to change that per service. And then the cross-AZ network traffic. The focus right now is on cross-AZ network traffic. The mapping services is a problem, but it's not an immediate problem. We're going to do git SSH after git HTTPS. It's not a blocker for that. But as soon as we finish git SSH, then we should move on to doing web and API. There are no known blockers for web and API other than build logs.
Yeah, but that's in progress.
Yeah. But that's in progress. So
how will you feel about mapping services to for me to raise priority? Because
yeah, I mean,
one milestone already, and I'm concerned because it's priority 3. It's gonna slip the next one for sure.
I'm concerned we don't even have a plan yet. So we need to understand better what the plan is.
I'm going to raise it to priority 2 for now.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm not really, yeah, I'm curious what direction we're going to go with that. I think right now my current thinking is that it is important for us to split out at least git HTTPS from HTTPS traffic, given how different those workloads are.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, what is the actual alternative? To bundle everything together again?
Yeah, I think the alternative would be all HTTPS traffic goes to web service pods, and which would mix. I mean, web and API, sure, that's like not they're very similar workloads, but git HTTPS is very different.
I remember the problems we used to have back in the day before the split. I don't think this is acceptable for GitLab.com scale to mix those things together. I just think we'll encounter so many odd problems just because of I raise it to P2. I think we need to figure out what we are going to do there, and if the charts is not going to provide us that, we'll need to find a different way, including forking the chart if necessary.
Yeah, I mean, one alternative without forking the chart would be to deploy the GitLab chart in multiple namespaces. And,
how much do we need to raise the complexity of what we run?
I know.
Work around a product deficiency. Like I don't feel comfortable with that, given the complexity of what we are running here, right? Like we are running hybrid infrastructure with now like multiple clusters with layer on top of layer on top of layer. Like it just feels a bit, for me, it feels overwhelming, and it could be that because I don't know much, but I don't know.
Okay, well, that's pretty much it for blockers.
So the proxy request buffering, that one, you said it really depends on mapping services. Can we tie them together?
Yeah, I was going to move it underneath. I think we can move it underneath. And to be honest, like it's not 100% clear whether this is an issue because we disable it globally and we already have a CDN in front and we think that might be sufficient and we can just leave it disabled globally. So I'll move it up under mapping services.
Cool.
Okay. Projects, pages, are we still looking at 6 to 8 months?
I raised that this Monday as a concern, and update from the working group multi-large is that we set ourselves a deadline, which is being able to stand up individual instances using a tool for July next year. I know it's
next year.
I know, but it will be a forcing function already, even if it's only July, given that the projections that the teams made specifically for pages was that they'll be able to roll everything out and finish in May. That ain't gonna work, right? Like that is not gonna work. So they'll need to pull in the timeline a bit. So I think this week, next week, and the week after, you'll see more, discussions first, like how, what, and how, and then I think priority will have to change. So I think it'll be pulled in. It's not going to be that long. Great. I hope, at least. Let me put it that way. I hope.
Sure.
So, people are aware that it's too much, or too little, rather, for what we need to achieve.
For someone who's not immediately involved in a lot of the higher level decision-making stuff, what is the motivation behind this aggressive kind of migration of pages? Was there one thing in particular, or is this just...
A couple of things, Graham. So one thing first is that we have been blocked with the migration on GitLab.com, right? Like pages is a crucial service, and you know the story on GitLab.com. That's one. Number two is that we have self-managed customers that are refusing to use Omnibus because they spent a lot of time migrating their services to Kubernetes. They don't want to have a one-off tool in VMs. And Pages is not supported in Helm chart at all. It can't be, right? Because of those weird dependencies. And then number three is we are working on the multi-large, which means like multiple GitLab.com like instances setup, like they do operations basically. And in order to do that effectively and efficiently, we can't replicate GitLab.com. We can't run hybrid infra easily, right? So, and the idea is, well, if we untangle pages and ensure that you can use Kubernetes properly and ensure that we have tooling around it to set you up for success, then all of these things are out of windows. So the investment across all these 3 points into pages and all of these migrations makes probably the most sense we currently have, you know?
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I wasn't even aware that pages wasn't supported in the chart. So that's news to me. So there you go.
Yeah, it has the NFS dependency across multiple services. So there was a suggestion for us to introduce NFS into Kubernetes. And well, Jarv knows how I reacted. Jarv was much more calm and said, well, these are the technical reasons. I just went out and said, like, this is not something that we should be doing at all or thinking about even, like not entertaining the thought. So Yeah, mixing 30-year-old technology with 5-year-old technology feels a bit off.
Cool. On to the demo. I wanted to give a quick tour of where we are and where we're going for the multi-cluster config. First of all, the thing that came up the last time we talked was the naming and trying to keep the names like not crazy. So what I settled on was we have the regional cluster, which is going to be environment GitLab GKE. We're just keeping the same name because we don't want to change the name because that requires changing, like rebuilding a cluster. Then the zonal cluster will just be environment plus the zone. So for pre-prod, it looks like this. Of course, this isn't set in stone. We haven't done anything, like we can't revert. So doing the POC on pre-prod, it looks like pre-GitLab GKE is going to be the regional cluster. And then we have pre-US East 1B, C, and D. And that keeps it nice and short. It keeps our names short that derive from the cluster name. So, and I think I did want, I wanted to include the full zone because, including the region, because we could eventually add additional regions here, and that'll be important. For the zonal configuration, I did a bit of refactoring. Instead of having everything tucked into main.tf, we now have gke.tf, which has the regional cluster, and then we have the GKE zonal TF, which just has the zonal clusters. The GKE zonal TF, which is what I'm showing here, is where we have some repeated module calls. Basically, we have two modules. We have the module for all the IP reservations so that Kubernetes can, so we pre-allocate the internal IP addresses for Kubernetes. And then we have the GKE module itself, which creates the cluster. The maintenance policy here will be different for each cluster. I haven't made that determination yet, but we'll eventually probably have like alternating maintenance times for the different clusters. And you can see like basically US East 1B, US East 1C, US East 1D. It's not great. It would be nice with like the next version of Terraform, we might be able to do this in a loop. But keep in mind also that each of these, like, I don't know, like they each have different subnetworks. I think even if we did it in a loop, you would still have a pretty big data structure that would, like, you know, need to be created for each zone because there's a lot of differences between them for subnets, node pools, and things like this.
So quick question, just that scrolling up the top, the reservations module, is that just essentially doing the VPC and the subnet networks now? Is that what its purpose is?
The reservations module is only doing IP and DNS reservations that are GKE cluster specific.
Okay.
We thought initially, I was thinking like, we'll just have a generic module that's not GKE specific, but if you think about it, this is fairly unique. You know, it's a unique thing because we're actually calling this module 3 times. So to use it outside of GKE doesn't really make sense. So that's why it's namespace to GKE, and it just creates a bunch of IPs. That's all it does right now, that are needed for monitoring the ingresses for Git, you know, and registry and all this.
Yep. So I like, that's fine. I think this is all good. One of the things actually, now we have external DNS deployed and available in all the clusters. We can actually get rid of reserved IPs and just use external DNS to create internal DNS entries and stuff and use that. Like we don't actually, especially in monitoring, for example, we actually don't need fixed IPs at all because it's all getting exposed through an external DNS, and that's the entries we use. So we may even actually be able to simplify that model quite a lot. The only thing we might keep is the registry one, but a lot of the others we could probably get rid of.
Yeah, registry and Git, because those are two ingress. So yeah, that's a good point. I didn't move over the external DNS because I wasn't actually sure how to do that yet. Currently, this is defined in main.tf.
I think, you know, this is perfect for us to get moving. It's certainly something I think we can easily refactor later and just start dropping some components out of Terraform and then dropping them out of the Helm file part as well, actually.
This is the main TF. It's like terrible.
Yeah, I'm really glad we're splitting it up.
Yeah. Well, it's in here somewhere, but there is like configuration for the external DNS, and I need to make that compatible with the zonal clusters still. Cool. That's it for Terraform. And then
I have a question for you, Jarv. It's more a stylistic thing. Is it possible to be explicit for the Terraform files? Right now you have GKE zonal and GKE. Can we call that GKE zonal and GKE regional? I think like we need to be explicit here. It's going to be a bit confusing over time. And
that
then
makes sense. Yeah.
Another remark I have is I'm concerned about the maintenance policy in that nothing is preventing us to just through a merge request somewhere, just change this and make it equal in like a refactor somewhere. And I don't think we want that because it could cause an outage. Well, can it cause an outage? If we have the same maintenance policy everywhere.
This is just for the, to go unavailable for Kubernetes, right? Like not outage. Like we wouldn't be able to deploy if there was a serious problem.
Yeah,
so
basically I've looked at this a lot quite recently, so I can very quickly run you through. So when we define the maintenance period, two things are going to happen. Master upgrades will always happen first, in which case we won't be able to do a deploy during that period. However, I've got a little bit of automation now that adds certain annotations to the Grafana, and that could be extended for anything. If you want to set a flag to stop deploys or whatever we want to do, we now do have control over when those, we have an entry point for understanding when those master upgrades happen. And it's going to be in the matter of minutes. They spin up new masters in the background, and then when they actually send us the alert, the upgrade's happening, they just swap them. I actually thought they took down the masters and what have you. So the control plane outage is like, it's only a couple of minutes, what I've seen, like 2 minutes or something.
Okay.
The node upgrades is obviously they like cycle through all the nodes, and that is more disruptive. However, that problem is, it's more impactful to potentially to our workloads, but we really should be handling it. And I think we can handle it, and we do handle it. We could make it faster by doing better pod disruption policies. But every upgrade I've done so far, and even watching it doing auto upgrades, it's been very safe. It just takes a long time. We can still stagger the upgrade windows, and I actually have a big discussion about how we want to stagger it and stuff, because the choice is, because the outage windows Google mandate that they've got to be so big, like 8 hours or something, the more we stagger them, it's like we're basically the whole week, we're just got one cluster constantly in an upgrade window. Or we just box them all together during US Sunday evening, Australia Monday morning, where I've got it at the moment, which is the quietest period of the week, and we just try and crack them through all together. And in theory, we are doing multiple at once, but each of those node pools should be rotating independently, and the pod disruption budget should be making sure we don't have major problems. So I'm happy to do it whatever we want, just we have to note the more we stagger it, we could be at the point where from Monday to Friday, we've always got one cluster that's potentially in maintenance.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Thanks for explaining that. Okay, and then my remark is invalid then. Doesn't matter then. Cool. Where is that issue, Graham? Could you link me that? Because I might have missed it.
And we always have the policy, obviously, of changing. It's like a one line or a couple line Terraform change. So if we want to change it, next week, we want to turn it to a different one, different timing. We may even do one cluster at some point, and then every other cluster all overlapped at the same time. So we have one kind of canary in case the upgrades go wrong. But yeah, Google have very specific requirements. They're not like you can only do 1 hour. You got to do like 4 to 8 hour blocks where they can do it at any point. So it's really tricky.
Okay. I mean, it does still make me feel more comfortable that we can do that without much effort, actually. So it's
we still have some tweaking we can do on pod disruption budgets. I feel we can make, like, the upgrades at the moment are a little painful because it's like it kills 100 pods and every pod takes like 2 minutes to kill. So it's like just sitting there grinding over it. So I feel like we can adjust things to make it better. We just haven't spent the time, which is fine because, you know, it's a low priority issue. We can figure that out later. We can tweak it.
Yeah. I think we can solve that once we see some additional real traffic and how that affects us, right? Because when Git comes in and web comes in, we're going to see like much longer times. So,
Yes.
So yeah.
And
Cool.
we still have problems about, like, with registry and Git HTTPS. If I'm like doing a Git push of a large object and it's taking like 10 minutes, we kill that pod, that is going to kill my
connection.
You know, and I don't have a good answer on what we should be providing as the customer experience in that case and how we can work around that. But that's like just a giant question we have to ask for all of the cloud native stuff.
It's not only cloud native. I think that question has been asked before for our regular setup. It's just that we never finished answering it, I think. Jaro, I think I asked you about it. Like, I couldn't find it. Like, I was trying to find where was that discussed, but I remember there was a discussion of what is reasonable, what is a reasonable timeout. And you were explaining to me how, because of the way we are rolling VMs and so on, we gave like a large chunk of time anyway, but not on purpose. It was by accident, basically. So
yeah, just by the fact that the omnibus takes a few minutes to install, we wait much longer. I kind of wonder how much of this is also a monolith problem where, you know, we don't realistically, like, Git HTTPS has very little dependency on Rails, right? It's just using it for authorization, yet we are cycling it very frequently for Rails updates. I'm not saying like there's much that we can do here, but the fact that, like, I kind of wonder whether other like GitHub, for example, whether they have whether they cycle their Git HTTPS service as much as we will.
I think that's a question we need to ask. So I would ask you to raise an issue for us to discuss this. Like, what is the actual limit, right? Like, what kind of expectations do we need to set to our users explicitly now, right? Like, not just what we are doing now by accident, and whether there is some application level work that can be done to, well, not do this all the time. So
I think the answer would be to have a separate service that you could deploy independently, right?
That's, I mean, if it's necessary, if we see a problem, we might need to attack it. So we expect to see a problem, but I would rather see something happening before we go and invest more time into that. You know, it sounds silly for me to say it, but yeah, like we need proof that this is actually a problem rather than just a minor inconvenience.
Yeah, I think the first thing we need to do is somehow figure out how long these connections are on average for Git HTTPS. And I'm not sure if we can do that with metrics. I need to check, but that would be interesting to see.
I think registry is just a bigger one. Like, if I pull a Docker image from GitLab's registry over my home connection, which, to be fair, I'm halfway around the world, my connection sucks. You know, it could take me 20 minutes. If I get 18 minutes into that, you roll a pod, it would just chop the whole thing and the Docker will fail. And that's kind of like, I don't know whether we have to see, like, does Docker support HTTP retry? Do we need to set some headers or something?
But we solved
just for registry, but forget everything else. All these apps may support some kind of mechanism so we can roll things easier. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, we're independently deploying registry separate from the monolith, so it's not as much of an issue because we aren't rolling those pods as frequently.
Yeah.
Only for config updates that affect registry. So it's this is, I think, this helps a lot, and it would help for Git HTTPS if we did the same. But divorcing Git HTTPS from the monolith is going to be a uphill battle. So we'll probably need to come with a lot of evidence. Cool. While Marin's typing that, you can take a look. I don't know. Graham, I saw you commented on the Helm files, MR, and you're okay with the current approach, like by having the separate environments per.
I think that makes sense. It's
Yeah.
yeah. You would know better than me. If they're literally going to be identical, we could probably get away without separate environments, but I suspect
Yep.
there's going to be some point where they're not going to be identical, in which case Helm file
Yeah.
environments is the only kind of mechanism we have to cleanly make the differentiation.
Yeah, they're going to be identical initially, except for tags like that we need to, and labels for Prometheus. So we need to know like which.
Yeah.
So that's why I went down the environment route.
Yeah.
But so yeah, so now we
It's
have.
not necessarily a bad thing too, because I think with environments, we can also actually force it to certain cube contexts, which is another thing we should actually probably look at doing as well. Like if you do like Helm file environment US East 1B, it will automatically always use the context for that cluster. So to avoid,
Yeah.
it's not a big issue, but it's another thing we can make sure people are hitting the right clusters with this kind of thing as well when we start rolling out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I decided, and you probably saw this, I decided to put the cluster and region in the environment file itself and just put it explicitly. One thing that where this is repeated is that we also set cluster and region as environment variables in CI. And this is how Hemfile knows, like, connects to the right cluster, right? Because this happens before it reads environments.yaml. I think setting this in two places is the right thing to do for now until we can change CI so that it reads this file and maybe it gets the cluster and region from it instead.
I haven't looked recently, but I'm also wondering if there's a GitLab CI has got more features for more dynamic pipelines where we can, like, here's some file or some data, can you dynamically set up the jobs or things that we need rather than us having to have a massive GitLab YAML for every single thing.
Yeah,
maybe, sorry.
Yeah, maybe that's an option.
Yeah.
But
it's the time to, I think
yeah.
explicitly setting things just gets us over the line now. We can make improvements later.
One thing I learned, what I initially was thinking of doing was that if you go to GitLab values Canary, you can see here that we inherit Canary from GPRD. This doesn't really work though if gprd.yaml.go template is an invalid YAML file, and it becomes an invalid YAML file when you have these variable definitions. Do you know what I'm saying or not?
Kind of.
Yeah, so if we look at, for example,
because it can't render that one anymore.
Yeah, for example, values.yaml.go template is a valid Go template, but it's not a valid YAML file. This so if you inherit something that has like variable definitions, this will fail because it's doing from YAML to YAML.
I think there's a template function we can do. If you do pipe that instead of from YAML, I think if you do template then to YAML, that might work.
I was looking, I couldn't figure it out, but anyway, this was my first thought, was that we could just have all of the zonal ones do a read file on the base regional YAML, but that didn't really work. So instead, instead what we're doing is this, like in the helm file.yaml, not for Thanos here, you can see that it actually, first it loads this n prefix, which is a value that's set for environment. So for all of these zonal clusters, env prefix is set to just pre. So first it loads pre.yaml.go template,
Right.
and then it loads the environment
actual
name.yaml.go
okay.
template. It's kind of like, because if the environment name is pre, what happens is it loads pre and then pre again. And it's fine. It's the same file, but
I see. For
it's a little bit
cluster.
janky.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
It is.
We could probably make this a bit nicer by being more explicit. Maybe make the environment name for the, regional cluster be like pre-regional or something, and then have a base environment named pre. But the thing is that like, I don't want to overload environments too much, and I don't know.
I've mentioned also to the developer of Helm file before as well about hierarchical environments, and he was kind of interested in the idea. Obviously, that's something that doesn't exist at the moment, but it seems like that's another thing we kind of would be useful, is a pure actual hierarchical environments and setting things at different levels. Because I think that's basically what we're just patching. We're just patching around that concept.
Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly what we're doing. But it works okay for now. So
it's it's not unreadable. Like, I read it and I knew what was going on, warts and all. So I think that's the important thing, is people can find stuff quickly enough, and it doesn't seem too confusing to me. So
yeah, you can't make hemfile.yaml can't be a Go template, right? It has to be because then you can get rid of these this janky syntax here, where because you could make a variable definition instead of embedding it. Because what I found was that if I did that, right, Helm file right now needs to be valid YAML, so you can't put variable you can't put variable declarations.
Yes, and that's why we have to you got to quote it that way. Yeah, so, you're right. It can't be an actual template.
This is just inscrutable. Like, looking at this stuff, like, it's so terrible.
Yeah.
You got backticks and
single quotes,
template within template.
Yeah.
Marin just shakes his head.
Progressing as society and engineering by going to this.
I know. It's awful.
Depressing thought.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's it. Is there anything else that we want to discuss?
There is one thing, but I only have 2 minutes. And okay, because there is some, is it confidential information? It is. I'll stop the recording.